I'm not gonna lie, you threw a lot of information at us.
Yeah,
You know what I'm
for
saying?
sure.
So some people listening, they might be overwhelmed.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's some advice just for a good place to start for the people who don't know where to start?
I actually really like that question, man. I think that, so many people use their phone constantly for so many different resources when it comes to, media and the information they get and the platforms that they're on and, how they're getting their information, right? But when it comes to simple things like that, they don't go online and just say, hey, how does an IRA work? How does an individual retirement account? What's the difference from an individual retirement account versus a Roth IRA? What's the difference from a 401k versus an individual retirement account versus a Roth individual retirement account, right? And a lot of that information is right out there, and there's so many different resources that allow you to kind of compare opinions and information, and and there's a lot of things that aren't subjective when it comes to how a Roth IRA works. That's black and white. Once you know how it works, that's how it works, right? But how you choose to invest it, that might be very subjective, right? So just looking at that and understanding what the facts are and what's kind of subjective, and understanding what you're looking to do, that's how you should start to look at it. First off, what's your goal? Are you looking to, make sure that you can retire and have a good lifestyle in your retirement? Are you looking to maybe buy a house that's maybe 10 years from now, 5 years from now? And understand that if you access an individual retirement account before a certain age, there could also be a penalty, right? So understanding, is this a short-term investment or a long-term investment, and what that looks like for you. And I just look at it back to your point of, where should people start? Google, use it as your friend. Google, ask yourself a question. Don't just think that the information isn't out there, right? And yes, you want credible sources. So making sure that you're using credible sources when you're online and researching and things like that's very important. Hopefully that people that are looking into this information, because they took the will to even look into it, they're probably smart enough to understand what is credible source and what maybe not necessarily is. And I always tell people, if you read 4 or 5 resources and you see a similar opinion, it's probably the truth. If you see a lot of multiple different opinions, it's probably subjective, and kind of break that down for people. If it's subjective, what that means, it's all based on opinion. There's no right or wrong. But if it's black and white, it's a rule, it's law. You can't change that, right? And I think sometimes people just need to understand the differences between that. But just use the resources that you have online to educate yourself, and that will take you so far, right? And you'll get kind of understanding why it's important. But I don't think people don't understand why I don't think people ever think to themselves, well, I don't want an IRA. I don't want to invest in my future. I don't want to make sure I can wake up and not retire. I think that life just goes by fast, and they don't understand how important it is when they're young.
People aren't thinking that far. They're thinking day to day.
Yeah, and when you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, man, that's the old saying that a lot of people go by. It's like when you're trying to get by on a month-to-month basis, and maybe you just bought a home, or maybe you're not even buying a home and you're trying to get to buy a home, or you're just trying to get by on a month-to-month basis. You're not thinking about putting your extra $50, $100, $300, maybe to an investment account. But you just don't realize about how important that is. And there's stories, time in and time out, where you don't have to make a lot of money to put yourself in a situation where you have success. What I mean by that is there's situations where people have made $40,000, $50,000 a year, and that's all they've made their whole entire life. But they put 10, 15% of that money towards a retirement account, right? And they wake up with a little bit more freedom than the next person because they maybe have 200, 300, maybe almost $500,000 put away by the time they're retired. And you just don't understand how important that is until you realize the only payment you have coming into retirement is Social Security. Right? And a lot of people don't understand that. And when we're in this younger generation now, we don't even know if we can depend on Social Security, 20, 30 years from now. So if we don't have Social Security, they're going to ask you, well, do you got any retirement accounts? You're like, nope. Well, how are you going to live on a month-to-month basis? And I see clients time in and time out where they're consistently still working right now because they just put the money away. And it's unfortunate. Right?
Yeah, so that honestly segues into my next question. What are some strategies to give people who want to retire early? Because like you said, you see clients who are still paycheck to paycheck, people who are still struggling. So
Yeah, I mean, the biggest advice there is just, once again, educate yourself about why it's important to have these vehicles, how they work with a financial professional that you can truly trust and that you feel like has the knowledge to put you in the best situation. And he isn't just throwing a bunch of numbers at you, telling him to trust you. You want to work with someone that really understands your financial plan when you're looking to retire, what options you have to get the best growth before you look to retire, and understanding the risk that comes with that too before that point comes. And I think that, that doesn't just come in one conversation. That should come in multiple conversations. So when we work with a lot of our clients, this isn't just a day-to-day transaction and we're in the house and out of the house. We're making sure that we have multiple meetings to really understand what's important to the client. So when we recommend an insurance financial vehicle, it really fits their needs versus what they maybe currently have. And by any means, you know, the biggest thing we talk to people is it's not financial advice. It's just making sure they understand about all the different financial vehicles that they have. And when they may feel like this vehicle might be important to have as part of their assets, you know, they're going to be interested and they're going to ask questions. And I think that comes down to being patient with people and making sure that you're asking good questions. And so what I mean by that is if you work with someone that's really asking you what it looks like for you to retire, when you want to retire, how much money you want to be put away, what it looks like for your lifestyle when you actually retire, you know, and what your expenses may be, that's someone that's really trying to make sure that you have enough so you can actually retire at the age that you want. Right. Realistic, because, you know, putting $50 a month and you say you want to retire by 45 and you're 30, you know, that might be a little tough. Right. And so that's why, once again, messing with those calculators where it's like understanding that, you know, you have to put X amount of dollars to have X amount of dollars, maybe with an average return. And the thing about the return is compound interest, and the average return, you don't really know if you're gonna get that return. That's kind of the issue there is understanding that, you know, one year you might get 10%, one year you might get 15. You know, the S&P last year did 20%, right? In 2022, the S&P 500, the Standard & Poor's Index, all that is simply the conglomerate of the top 500 companies, you know, within our economy. So when you buy into the S&P, you're buying in some of the top companies like Apple, you know, Amazon.
Is that like the Fortune 500 essentially?
Essentially, exactly. Fortune 500 companies, you know, and the beauty of that is that, you know, on a year-to-year basis, when you look about financial professionals and you compare it to the S&P 500, there's only about, you know, I would say roughly about 8% of the financial industry as advisors that can really beat the S&P over a 10-year period. So essentially, you know, a lot of advisors might recommend your, you know, money going into this, and this, but essentially they're not even outperforming the S&P. And they might have their own reason and things like that. And you want to listen to that. Once again, this isn't financial advice saying they're right or wrong, but by any means, you want to understand if, you know, you're getting 6% over here, but this did 20% over here. You know, why do I have more money over here? And maybe he has a great reason for that, and maybe he doesn't. But once again, you just want to educate yourself, which comes down to understanding what you have and asking good questions. So it's not just trusting in someone, you know. I think essentially if you don't have an account, get one. It's better to put some money away than no money, especially even if you don't know what's going on. It is what it is. But at the same time, once you start to invest, you should motivate yourself to understand a little bit more about what you do have, so you don't find yourself in a 2008 crisis where you took a significant loss, you know, a couple of years before you go to retire. Right, man. So there's those benefits and negatives, and the big thing is that the positive of having them always outweighs the negative.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I don't mean to put fear in anybody when you talk about working with financial professionals or kind of the market and ups and downs by any means, but ultimately you want to have a retirement account. You know, you want to make sure money's being put away, but you also don't want to just give your whole life savings and trusting into a company to make sure that, you know, your goals are going to be there, you know, in the future. You want to make sure on a year-to-year basis. And sometimes I've seen some people not understand anything that they have, and unfortunately that's why they're paying high fees, not getting the returns they're looking, or maybe took on too much risk where they lost, you know, a significant amount when the market didn't perform very well, and that hurts them a whole lot more than the growth. Kind of like going to the casino and you win $4,000 or $5,000, it's not changing your life, but every time you lost a 4 or 5, it hurt you. Well, at that point, you probably wouldn't go to the casino, right? And a lot of people are taking on that risk, specifically retirees in the market, and they have no goal for the risk. They have no goal for the growth. So even if they make the money, it's not going to change their life. But in retirement, if you lose the money, it could really affect your retirement. So specifically what I speak about is more security with retirees specifically. For younger people, though, you can take on the risk. You know, if you lose a big portion this year, you got the next 25 years to make it back. And, you know, and bottom line is the market always going to outperform through time. It always does. We haven't seen where, you know, over a course of 10 years, people take a huge hit. It doesn't work like that. So making sure you just put some money away to make sure it's going to be there is the bottom line, the most important thing you can do.
Hey, my last question is, so what happens to the account if the holder passes away?
Yeah, there's a beneficiary on most of these accounts. So, you know, it doesn't just go to the company and people don't have it. You know, if, you know, say for example, I have some IRAs and, you know, my fiance specifically, I pass away and I have her as a beneficiary, she's going to be able to have access to those accounts, you know, and access to that money. Now, she's going to be held to certain rules and regulations because they're going to be inherited, specifically if they're IRAs or things like that, which I won't get into that day, but more or less specifically, it's that, you know, she's going to have access to them and your family members can have access to them, right? And that's important to make sure that if I don't get to use this money before, you know, I go to retirement, you know, my family can still use the money that I'm putting away. right? And you just got to keep to the fact of, is this a short-term investment or a long-term investment? And depending on what that is going to dictate what vehicle you may choose. But it doesn't take away from the principle that investing is key and making sure that you have money to be there for your future or for retirement or for maybe your future home or whatever it may be. And maybe it's just a savings, right? I mean, that's important. And I tell people, before you get an investment, you probably want a couple months of, your bills just put away. And then you should start to look to challenge yourself to put just $50 to even $100 away a month and just see how that grows over the years. And I'm telling you, after you start to see it grow after 3 to 5 years, you'll start to motivate yourself to even put more money there, because you see the growth that you're getting, and that's important. But once again, start with just asking yourself the questions that are popping up in your head. Ask the internet, educate yourself, see where that goes, and then reach out to different financial professionals. There's so many resources, whether it's Charles Schwab, Vanguard, and I'm giving them free marketing right now, right? Fidelity. But essentially, at the end of the day, it could put them in a situation where they're going to look at the retirement and be excited to get to retirement versus saying, I'm going to have to work for the rest of my life. And most Americans right now, barely have, $1,000 put away if they had an emergency happen. So, and making sure that you can go to retirement is half the battle, and I get it. You don't got money right now. So what do you think about thinking about retirement? I come from that background. I come from understanding that, you're just trying to get by, let alone provide for the future. But you just don't understand how important that is, because we're all going to wake up, one day, and we're going to be 65, 68, and we're not going to want to work as much. And depending on what you do today is going to dictate what options you have later. Right. So for sure.
Definitely, man. Hey, I appreciate you coming on, man, and giving us some free game. I just feel like in the Black community, financial literacy isn't talked about enough. And like you said, man, investment is key.
Yeah, it is. And side bit, before you guys even go and get an investment account, go buy some life insurance, man. Most of these people, out here don't even have the security for if they weren't here today. Right. And they got kids out here. They got family members that depend on them. And, it costs to die. People don't get that. At the end of the day, cremation, burial experiences, burial costs, expenses and things like that. People don't understand how expensive that is, So make sure that you have your ducks in a row and just start looking into the future.
People don't understand until, unfortunately,
it happens, right? And there's nothing worse sitting down with the family and saying, your mother, your father don't have anything established. And so what that looks like for you guys have to come up with the cost. And if they don't come from a family that has that money, all it's doing is putting the next generation in another financial burden, not allowing them to get ahead. So, what I tell people is this is a lot of information, and people feel like it's easy when it comes from you and that's all you know for the past 7 years. But, when are you going to ask yourself and challenge yourself to start, educating yourself about what your options are? Right. Because, it doesn't take anything and it doesn't cost anything to go online and educate yourself about making sure you can protect your family or protect your retirement, right? So you can have the retirement you want. And, I always tell people I'm an open book. I don't charge anybody for any meeting. So, a lot of times when people are calling me, picking my brain, I'm not charging them for that. And so I don't care if you guys use me as a resource. I just challenge people to use somebody as a resource to educate themselves or use the resources that are online instead of just sitting there hoping that one day things are going to change.
Absolutely.
Right.
Hey, appreciate y'all for tuning in, man, for this special edition, Financial Literacy. It's your host. I do interviews, man. Special guest, Chris.
For sure. You guys stay blessed. Happy 2025, man.